Thank you all for coming along to see my talk. I've titled it Questioning Your Marks. My name is Neil Richards. I work for, my day job is for the Higher Education Statistical Agency, but I'm not really going to talk to you about that. I'm just going to talk to you about all sorts of things really to help in certain ways that you do your visualizations. I have a blog which I'm quite active on called Questions in Dataviz. So you might want to sort of see that and see the kind of things that I come up with. But also, and this is something I'm slowly coming to terms with, I'm a Tableau Zen Master. That slide went up before I knew I was getting a t-shirt. And really what I just want to say is what a Tableau Zen Master is I'm a bit like you guys, only I'm allowed to wear a different t-shirt. So I thought they'd made a mistake when I got nominated and I was made one, and I still couldn't quite realize it because I always thought that the Zen Masters were the Jedi guys, you know. But I'm keen. I'm a Zen Master because I like to teach, I like to share, I like to evangelize, I like to talk, I like to blog a lot, I like to ask a lot of questions. But if I see a talk that says it's Jedi, I'll cross it off the list. It's too hard for me. So I'm going to give you a sort of general talk, but if you were expecting sort of really clever Jedi stuff that only Zen Masters know, well, maybe you can open the door and go to somewhere else, but I really hope you don't. That's just to explain, really, it's a sort of community position, and it gives me the opportunity to talk to you in big, scary numbers like this and just sort of tell you a bit more about my Tableau journey and some of the sort of thoughts and ideas I have. So, I mentioned my blog, which is Questions in Dataviz. If you actually see it, every so often I sort of think of something. Sometimes I can drive it into a question, sometimes it really is a question, but they're all sort of different topics. So to do a talk, I really had to sort of think of something that has a bit more of a narrative, that makes a bit more sense from start to finish. So I've sort of come up with some questions all about how you might want to frame some of your data visualizations apart from just the data you put on there. These are some of the things that we're going to cover. So starting from what constitutes a viz, going all the way through to a little bit about self-review and feedback. So we'll start with what constitutes a viz. So before I go into that, I have a couple of sort of slides which I love to show, which is just to do with what does Tableau actually mean. So this is what Tableau means if you look it up in dictionary.com or something like this. The English definition of the word Tableau, we're talking about a picture or a scene or even a group of people or objects, so a striking scene. So the idea being that when we create a viz, we are just trying to paint a picture to show a scene. And more than that, if you actually look at the French definition, because of course Tableau is a French word that we presumably nicked, there's lots more sort of sub-definitions if you like, but really it's a board, so it's a blank canvas, so it's not even really a scene, which might be the sort of final outcome of what you do, the visualization. Tableau is a blank canvas. So at some point in my journey, I think I was hearing a talk by Andy Kriebel, and he said, the way to think about it is, if you can draw it, Tableau can visualize it. Now, some of these things, you can draw a bar chart and not show me, you can get that really easily and quickly. Some of these things, it's a lot more fiddly. But essentially, whatever you want to show, whether it's text, whether it's art, whether it's drawing, whether it's visualization, Tableau can actually do that for you. So we go to what actually a viz consists of. I've stolen this slide completely. I've stolen this from a recent talk from Alberto Cairo. And one of the difficulties I had in putting this talk together was I love data visualization. I love going to events like this, and I keep seeing other things which I want to put in here. I keep just getting little nuggets of really sort of good information, sort of learning from who I considered the experts or people who I sort of wanted to hear talk. So I don't know, maybe it's optimistic. I really hope that maybe that's what you might get from a talk like this. You will probably see a lot which you might think is common sense. You'll see a lot which might be sort of the way I think about things. But if you might just sort of get one or two little nuggets where you think, oh, that's quite cool. Remember that conference I went to, and he came up with that soundbite, or that idea, or that principle, that might just sort of help me go ahead with my visualizations. So, sorry, back to the slide. Let's try this. Oh, no, that's the wrong button. That was supposed to be the laser button. Oh, it is. Don't need lasers. I'll point. Back to the slide. A visualization consists of a framework, visual encodings, and annotations. So what we might consider the actual, the meat and drink of the viz, the actual marks, that's really what we're calling the visual encodings. But any visualization really needs to have a framework, and that framework is going to consist of your title and the context of the viz, so that you get all the information you need. And very often, more often than not, it's going to need some kind of annotation as well, just to help the reader of your viz. So, well, you've just seen this one. What are marks? Well, most of you will have seen this. This is what Tableau defines as the marks. So it's the actual data bit of your viz. The bars, the lines, the area, etc., etc. Or a slightly funkier version, thanks to one of many t-shirts I've managed to blag this particular week already. A Datablick version of what are your marks. I didn't know about glitter. That's cool. I'm going to have to try some glittery marks in some future ones. You can actually consider marks in all sorts of ways. Now, this is a brilliant resource which you might want to look at. That's from ft.com, so the Financial Times. They have what's called a visual vocabulary. I see lots of phones going up, so I'll leave this up for a little bit. You can't see the detail there, but I would certainly recommend if you want to sort of look at that particular URL. And it really sort of goes through not just all the different types of mark, but if you were to sort of look closer up, for example, there's really good, useful ideas as to when you might want to use each of these. So from the simple, like a bar chart, to a not so simple, like a Marimekko chart. But I wanted to show you this because a few months ago I had the idea, and I was working on a viz with what I thought was a pretty familiar data set, and I was trying to decide what to include, what not to include. Do I include this title, whatever? And I thought, I wonder if this is recognizable completely without any text on at all. So I sort of started my viz, and that's sort of not particularly finished, but it had all the information, and I thought, yeah, I still know what that is, but does anyone else? So I took off all the text, the annotations, the title, the axes, and I put it on my blog and on Twitter, and it got a bit of reaction. So I wonder if any of you can work out what this is. No, I don't know. Some of you may have seen this, some of you may not. But can anyone sort of make a guess as to what this might represent? I mean, from the silence, I can tell it's difficult. So, I mean, I started to get, I put a few clues out. I've got a few respondents, People thought, well, it looks like maybe, is that some kind of timeline? I said, yeah, that's pretty good. And some people counted up all the lines, and there are, I think, 45 lines. And I thought, oh, that's quite significant. People thought, oh, is it chromosomes? It could be chromosomes. It's sort of DNA. I'm sure that's what it is. It really looks like that. And as soon as they got sort of one idea, that idea sort of spiraled a little bit, no pun intended. But no, it's nothing to do with that at all. So then you start to make assumptions. If you don't know about the data, you think, well, I know it's by this guy, Neil. He's British. Is it British political parties? No. He likes seeing sports visualizations. I know, it's some kind of league table. And no, it's not. And in the end, I dropped a few hints. And finally, somebody did get it, but it took a while. One of the things just to mention as well, that people were thinking, these ones here, they look a bit weird. They don't have a line. Why are there some at the bottom that don't have a line? And I sort of desperately wanted to say why. And it was so obvious to me because I knew. But people didn't, and you just can't assume that they will know. So I'll put you out of your misery now. This was the timelines of the US presidents. And I thought, there's 45 of these, 45 presidents, and each one of the yellow, red, green, and blue dots represented the birth, start, and death date. And now suddenly people realize, okay, we had the ones who were alive at the bottom. And the ones where there were just kind of only 2 dots, it was people like Lincoln and Kennedy. You think, oh, I understand now. You know, presidency end and death date were the same. And Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic picked up on this as well and put this on her podcast and said, once you've seen it, it's so obvious, it's difficult to unsee, and you can get it. And you could take the marks away, I suppose now, and you could sort of work with it. But you really do need this information. So it was just an exercise in thinking, you might be really invested in the data, but strip away all the text, the annotation, the title, and your audience has got no chance. I had a couple more. I thought, oh, hang on, and there's just a close-up so you can see something like Abraham Lincoln. So I had a couple more because I thought, well, some of you might have seen the blog, and I want something that none of you have seen. I thought, well, what kind of chart can this be? Does anyone have any suggestions what this chart might be? It's a line chart, so you think a line chart is probably something versus time, and it is something versus time. And there are a lot of lines, so there's about 150 lines, 150 to 200. And you can sort of think, I reckon it's countries. I reckon this is something against time. But unless you have the clues, you're just not really going to get much more than that. So what this one particularly is, this is CO2 emissions against time. And then when you look at it, you think, okay, I kind of know that's what CO2 emissions are like. I can see it now. The colours are really unhelpful, because who has ever seen China in blue, USA in orange, and UK in green? So if you don't have as many cues as possible, you're just not going to get it. And finally, I thought, well, I wonder if there's something that you can show with nothing but marks. So I finally came up with something. I thought, right, do people recognise this? What do people think this is? So it's political. It's obviously the UK. I have shown UK maps to people in non-UK audiences, and they didn't recognise it as UK. I think we're in safe ground here. And so finally you can think, right, I get it. This is an election map. I know what blue means, red means. We've got Conservative, we've got Labour, we've got all the traditional things. So this is finally something that you would recognise. But unless you're a real expert, you don't know that I took this from 1997. So you can think that you've included everything, but unless your title says these are the different parties' constituencies in the 1997, then you just are not going to get that information. Okay, so that's enough from the quiz. The most important thing, well, I never say the most important thing, but one crucial thing is, how is my viz going to be consumed? So, here's a man consuming a personal lifestyle hero of mine, if not a personal viz hero of mine. Example, very fast-paced consumption. And we get the impression, we're often sort of told that visualizations need to be consumed instantly. They need to be, it's a fast-paced thing. So here's some examples. Seth Godin said, and I'm not sure the context of this, but he said, I'm not sure what this is granted for. You are trying to make a point in 2 seconds for people who are too lazy to read the 40 words underneath. So he's one of many people who have articulated that that visualizations should be instant. They should be instantly gettable. You need to see them. But I'm not sure I like that very much. I like that about cookies, but I'm not sure I like that about visualizations. And there's been a lot of disagreement with that. And only just recently, Elijah Meeks, who is a data visualization expert and blogger as well, he's done a number of posts called Data Visualization Fast and Slow. And he does acknowledge that the fast mode of data visualization is real. It is important. We do have to do things which, traditionally go on the CEO's desk, and they need to see within seconds what it actually means. But if we only limit ourselves to those kind of visualizations, we're limiting not only ourselves, but we're limiting what the reader has a potential to take out, or what the reader has a potential to learn from the visualization. I think one example, Alberto Cairo, I mentioned him already before, he's also very keen to call BS on this particular quote. He really doesn't like the idea of fast-paced visualization, because it needs to be read. And if you think about it in terms of maybe a newspaper journalist coming up with a chart and the editor, sometimes the editor will come back and say, no, this chart is no good. I didn't understand it. And maybe the journalist will then go back to the editor and say, well, did you read it? And he'll say, no. You have to read a chart. There are so many times when you just see a chart, it goes past and it's important to grab the attention, but you have to be able to read a chart too. So it's very much talking about fast and slow. We'll talk about Makeover Monday. I don't know how many of you went to the Makeover Monday session yesterday. There was a live session. Makeover Monday is a wonderful project which has been, it's very much been the making of me, and it's a project where people are provided with a data set, and you have an opportunity to create something in any way that you want, that you might feel improves on the original visualization. And it also gives you an opportunity to compare with what the rest of the community are doing. And it gives an opportunity for the organisers, Andy and Eva, to have a look and to offer critique. Makeover Monday is both wonderful and huge. I don't know, maybe 200, 500 people now every week will do Makeover Monday. And the organisers give so much of their time to it that they will say, I won't have time to see your tooltips. I'll probably only have time to see it on my phone. I can look at the screenshot, but I can probably not go into Tableau Public. So if you're designing for consumption, if you're designing, for whatever reason, that's fine. But if your consumption, for example, is to get feedback from the organisers of this, these are the things that you need to consider. And it's a really valid example of that busy CEO, director, I want a quick chart that I can understand now without clicking anything example. So there's one example of the fast consumption Cookie Monster type visualization. But we talk about visualizations that you want to have time to read. Now this one by Ludovic Tavernier is the winner of the first feeder for IamViz. So Ludovic will be on stage in New Orleans along with two more yet to be determined. And when I put this on the screen, I thought, oh, you can't read that. It's tall and long form. But I almost make no apologies for that because this isn't the form, seeing it whiz past on the screen isn't the format in which to read it. The way in which to read this is to have this on your browser in Tableau Public, to look through, to look at all the analysis, the design, the graphic that is there, and really sort of appreciate what a good visualization that is. It's only fair, I have sort of come up with some close-ups so that you can see, the whole thing reads like a book of chapters with different pieces of analysis and different text and explanations all the way through chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. So then, we've mentioned that it's important how your viz is being consumed. How important are titles? You think they are pretty important. I want to start with this particular visualization. I gave one of my first talks about a year or so ago, and I was doing a talk on storytelling in data visualization. And this particular chart, it's a sort of well-known chart. It's from the Wall Street Journal. And it tells the story of measles eradication across the states before and after this line here when a vaccination was brought in. And I have this in my slide deck, and I was practicing, and I practiced it whatever with my wife. And she looked at this, and she understood what I was saying, but she looked a little blank. I'm kind of used to that, so I kept going. But then at the end she said, and so I said, well, look, isn't it really good? And you can see we started off with the heat map where we have all these sort of much higher numbers of measles eradication, and then as soon as the vaccine came in, look how it's gone, isn't it cool? It even looks like a Petri dish, don't you think? It's a really good sort of storytelling example. It has a narrative, it has a plot point, if you like, where it all changes, and just, how do you know? Where does it tell me that? And my wife, as she always is, was absolutely right. And what I'd done, I pasted this into my visualization, but I hadn't pasted the title in. So I knew what I was talking about because I'd just seen it and I'd lifted it and I had my speech ready and I was sort of in full flow, much like I am now. But without that context, that didn't mean anything. So once I put the proper title back in within the context of the article, it made perfect sense. We have a proper title to catch the attention, battling infectious diseases, and then there's a subtitle below that, a takeaway title, if you like, which is often very much recommended in a sort of explanatory visualization like this. The number of infected people measured over 70 years across all states has declined. And the visualization is a great classic visualization, but only when that is included. Otherwise, it's a head scratcher. It's a, what's this? What are these colors? So with that in mind, yeah, actually, I told you I have a habit of making last-minute changes. This tweet came when I was on the train up to the conference, and I thought, well, what great timing, because I'm going to talk about titles, but you don't know this. And Lilac is another Zen master who put this thing, she said, I reckon this is a really unpopular opinion. And I was thinking, no, it's not unpopular at all. I'm going to talk about it. But so titles are hard. And if you have headlines on a Dataviz, you know, it's problematic because you might be, you know, it's a difficult thing to do. And what you have to be aware of is when you create a data visualization, there's no such thing as unbiased data. Because whatever you're deciding to do, you've already made a decision what data set to put in your visualization. So you've already decided, you've made an editorial decision of yourself, what you're going to put in your visualization. And then as soon as you put a title at the top, you're possibly distorting, possibly not, but you're in danger also of making an additional slant on the data. Sometimes people do it deliberately, sometimes not. But it is really important, and so that's why I think it should be a popular opinion. Headlines are problematic. So I tried to come up with some examples of my own. I hope this wasn't too problematic. We've gone thematic, Eurovision Song Contest. So what I've tried to do is take the best advice, which is to have a title that catches the attention at the top, and then a subtitle, which is your takeaway title. Now, often it's quite good to pose that as a question. So I haven't said countries vote for their friends and neighbours. I've said, do they? I wonder what people in this room think, whether they do. I think they probably do. I've chosen Finland here. I don't particularly know why, but because it's at the top, you get quite a bit of impact from there as well. It's really bright purple around Finland, really bright purple around Finland, both sides. So it's no great surprise that Norway, Sweden, Estonia and Iceland are big friends to Finland in terms of both giving and receiving votes. But another nice thing about this is that this has the me factor, which is often quite a nice thing to do in your visualization. Is you think, well, that's all very well, but I'm not from Finland. I'm from Romania. I wonder what it's the same for Romania. You might look and you see that you've given a lot of votes to and from Moldova, and you think, oh yeah, maybe it is true. And you know, maybe you're from Greece, and you see you've given a lot of votes to Cyprus. Now, this may or may not be true for all countries, which is why I sort of left it as a question. I think it's a relatively sort of fun, interactive visualization. But I hope that at least the title and the subtitle sort of give you an idea of what to expect from the visualization. Another one, I'm trying to keep it to a sort of relatively simple one. In here, I wanted the title at the top, and I wanted a takeaway line as well, but this time I've made the takeaway line dynamic. Because the idea of this is, I don't know if you can see, we've got a parameter at the top. The data set allowed you to pick a number of sports, about 64, I think, all to look at ESPN, who had rated all of the different sports on, no, I can't remember what it was now, speed, endurance, power, durability, etc. Various things to decide which sports are supposedly tougher on different measures. So in this case, we've got a nice takeaway title as well and a subtitle, but I've been able to build that in depending on what was the results of the dashboard were. And finally, I just sort of wanted to show you what my final president's dashboard looked like. Actually, I always think it's quite cool developing a dashboard on the screen and then it being taller than you in real life. There's something quite surreal about that. So I went a bit more stylized with this. But in terms of the titles, I thought, well, this, I'm not putting this here for analysis. I'm putting this here for you to explore and for you to think, you know, visually you might think it's quite nice, and then there's a few things that you can explore which say things like, oh yeah, Obama and Clinton are almost exactly the same age. Their lines are on top of each other. But that's not really a takeaway title. So for where you might put a subtitle or a takeaway subtitle, for me, it was ideal to just put a little visual explanation of the graph, because it's not very standard. So because this is perhaps an example of an exploratory dashboard rather than an explanatory dashboard, I didn't feel there was a takeaway fact I wanted to explain there, because what am I going to say? Presidents live for different ages at different times. But there's been some research done on titles, on framing and slanting. This research has been done by these gentlemen at the bottom from the University of Chicago. And essentially, I mean, they've got two different examples here, and where you can see they put a bracket around them, they came up with two different titles for each one. And one would be sort of pro a particular policy, and one would be against. So, for example, if we're looking at the one about Syrian refugees, one title supporting that the US should increase Syrian refugees said that the US has accepted a lower percentage of refugees than UK, Spain, Finland and Australia. The other title, spinning it around, said the US has accepted more numbers of Syrian refugees than UK, Italy, Russia and Finland combined. So they would use the numbers or the percentages to frame the title to give two completely different views. Now, I mean, I looked at the answers to the research, and they sort of, as you might expect. So I was expecting to sort of skim read it, but a couple of things that I took out from it were surprised me. One, they said we observed, and part of what they did was they asked participants to write their own titles. They found that people couldn't do it, or people subconsciously, depending on what they thought the US should be doing about Syrian refugees, were slanting the title one way or another, even when they were asked to make really neutral titles. And they also found that people weren't aware that they were doing that, and people didn't really know that that could happen. So whether, I'm not sure what the participants in the study were, but whether they were sort of journalism students or whatever. So not only did people find it quite hard not to introduce bias, but they sort of didn't know that they could be doing that as well. So that's really quite a key thing to take away from that. You may have seen this. This is a visualization originally by Simon Shah called Iraq's Bloody Toll. Now, you can't get more of a striking headline than that, if you like. So the title they've gone for, in a sort of stark font, stark words, Iraq's Bloody Toll. And there's lots of other design decisions they've made. They've made the bar chart downwards, so the number of deaths, casualties is actually highest there and then highest in the middle. So they've made it a blood red colour. They've made it sort of trickling down from the top. It's really sort of quite a stark visualization. But what if we were to do that, make it a bit more conventional, and if we were to put in a different title, and even change to a softer font, one of the things, well, and a softer colour, suddenly it isn't even a different chart, it's the same chart. It's the same chart upside down. You get a completely different emotional reaction to it, not least from the title. So, this is the most sort of famous example I can think of, how really changing the title can introduce bias, or can introduce a different opinion of how you might want to see it. I'll give credit to Andy Cockgreave, who's the gentleman you've seen on stage in an England shirt. This is something that he's created, and I think it's a fabulous illustration. Okay, I wanted to talk about white space as well. Something I ask you sort of about is white space your friend, but just to sort of define it. This was a really simple line chart I did. In fact, there's another initiative run by Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic, who runs Storytelling with Data, which is a fabulous both book and website, which really gives second to none advice on visualization. But she's sort of running a challenge on different graph types, and she said, well, come up with a line chart. So I thought, well, I'm probably safe with this. I can't think many people are going to do this. But you really can't see much with that. That's quite stark. I put the line in, we've got the marks, we've got the dates, but I suppose my first question is, where is the white space here? And I pressed the wrong button last time I tried to point, so I'll just go and point it. I mean, the white space here, that's pretty obvious. We have a lot of white space, which is defined as the bit that isn't showing data. If I was to ask, where is the white space here? Where do you think the white space here is? Is that the white space? Or the one around it? Exactly, yes. That happens to be white, but this is the white space. So the white space, it's not a color thing, it's the background, non-data thing. Incidentally, when I sort of surreptitiously put this in my slides, I didn't know it was going to be on show around the corner in the Viz Gallery. And if you didn't know it was on show around the corner in the Viz Gallery, this is on show around the corner in the Viz Gallery. So you have the same, the reason I wanted to put in some more fancy stuff is A, because I love putting fancy stuff in, but B, just to say that you have the same considerations whether you're doing a sort of simple bar chart like maybe my soccer and rugby one, or whether you're just sort of trying to go a little bit more left field. The data-ink ratio, anyone who might have sort of studied Edward Tufte, which is the Bible of data visualization, he described the data-ink ratio. So data-ink basically is anything that you're using for non-redundant purposes to actually show the data in your chart. And so when he talks about the ratio, he's talking about the important chart ink that you use divided by the total ink. Now, because this was in 1983, he really is talking about ink. So we're not, when we're showing PowerPoint slides of what we've done in Tableau, we're sort of thinking of ink as a concept. In this case, he really was talking about ink used to print charts in a book or in a report. And it's all about sort of maximizing that data-ink ratio. But he is quite insistent on that as a sort of principle that should never be broken. But I mean, I just want to talk about white space, which is connected with sort of data ink there. So some examples, right? This is the US president's example I showed you before when I put the marks back in. So how might you sort of reduce the data ink ratio in this a little bit? Well, there's a few sort of redundant things. I think most people know those guys on the left are presidents. So you don't need the thing up the top that says president. And most people can work out that those numbers between 1742 and 2017 are years. So even though it's sort of stating the obvious, I think you don't really need them. And another nice point, or a nice bit of advice that I like to use a lot now, is these legends that we have. It's important it's in there. We have to know that blue birth date to yellow death date. We have to know that, otherwise you'd be confused like you were when I showed it before. But it's often nice to incorporate that in your text so that you can make a sort of clearer look. So just a few sort of simple changes, and you can remove some of the text around it. What I've also done, which might have been too wise given the fact that this has been projected onto a big projector, but I've made these grayer. It's one thing that, another piece of advice that you're often given is, if you have to have non-data elements, and yeah, you still need to have which president is which, otherwise how do you know? Just take the ink off them a bit, make them a little bit grayer, make them stand out less. Nadia Bremer, who's another brilliant data artist, is quite an advocate of that. You can see that in her work a lot. And I have another example here from a chap called Nicolas Rouget, and he's taken this right to the real sort of maximum effect. Now, I love this. It's essentially a timeline of all the elements and when they were discovered, and it loops backwards and forwards because the line shows you all the elements in order. So the timeline, in terms of when they're discovered, is looping backwards and forwards. Now, the idea of this is, it'd probably be like to have a nice poster to put on in a chemistry lab or something like that. The idea of this is very much a data art. but you do need to know a bit about it. I can't tell you what each of these are unless I stand right here. This little haze of purple is a little, almost unreadable line, but it is readable, telling you what each element is. And it needs that. There's no better example of fading it right into the background, because otherwise that means nothing. But that's sort of one example of minimizing purple space, purple white space. Okay, so more studies. Michelle Borkin recently did a study just looking about sort of white space, because she wanted to know what makes a visualization memorable. So we have sort of 3 sets of visualizations here. I think there were about 800 in total, and the most memorable here were these 12 on the left-hand side. So most memorable, top left, going down to 12th most memorable, but still out of 1,800 odd there. And then the next thing that the people doing the study managed to do was, if you remove anything that looks like a sort of human recognizable person or object or cartoon, what are the 12 most memorable then? And only one has survived from there to there. So those are the 12 most memorable that don't have human recognizable sort of features in. So what that's essentially shown is none of these are very good for white space. They've all put in things to embellish the chart. You know, they put in photos, they put in people, they put in pictures of dinosaurs. But it means people memorize those better than they did those. And over here, these are probably 12 that you would find in Stephen Few or Edward Tufte's books as really sort of good examples of great information-telling dashboards. But these were the 12 least memorable. So I'm not saying, and Michelle Borkin apparently has got a lot of grief for this, I'm not saying you have to go and put dinosaurs in all your charts, because that's sort of how people reacted to her, and they said, do I have to put dinosaurs in all my charts now? And she said, no, actually, there were some still quite bad charts with dinosaurs in, but I suppose what I'm saying is consider everything on its options. Don't think just because Edward Tufte or Stephen Few or other people who say, no, we must reduce that ratio to make things clear and crisp. Don't think that's because, don't think that's something you have to do. Just consider it, and it all depends on what your particular purpose is and how you want your viz consumed. One of my favourite quotes, actually, isn't from anyone famous at all. It's from someone who may or may not be in this room, Simon Beaumont, who told me, intrigue leads to insight. And I thought, that's brilliant. And I looked up the quote to see who said it, and no one did, so maybe he invented it, I don't know. But I thoroughly agree with that, and I'm probably guilty of perhaps sort of going off the scale somewhat, but I do think, particularly in a fast-moving world or a fast-consuming world, that intrigue leads to insight. So sometimes that's worth bearing in mind. And here we go, another study. I'll just move it quickly. This was about chart junk. Is chart junk any good? The one on the left was by a gentleman called Nigel Holmes. I mean, even I cringe at that one on the left. I would never do anything like that. But people have, they did a study. Here's what that one should look like, according to best principles. Which one do you think people remembered? Obviously the one on the left. But which one do you think people remembered the figures in best? Actually, it was one on the left as well. So you would expect me to say the one on the right, but it didn't. The awfulness around it didn't put people off from trying to remember the figures. Okay, what are annotations? Well, it's probably quite obvious what annotations are, but we'll talk a little bit about annotations as well. Another stolen slide here from Lisa Charlotte Rost, who writes prolifically wonderful blog in Data Wrapper, all about sort of principles of data visualization. And this one, I wanted to put this in particular because I love the quote at the top about annotations. If you're putting in an annotation, that's for if you've got something that you know that your readers don't. So you might, it might be something you know and you assume your readers might know, but they don't. So here's an example, and it's sort of anonymized, but put in that annotation to explain why that line dropped in that particular year or that particular month, or what those particular figures represented. Put in the annotation to explain why this bit's shaded grey. They're predicted figures. They're projected figures. Okay. I know that now. Now you've told me. But if you don't sort of put in these annotations, then you've got the problem that you, as the designer, might know stuff, but that they don't. So we'll go back to my line graph earlier. The challenge was to put a line graph in particular. This needs annotation, doesn't it? I don't care about the data-ink ratio. This is full of white. We've got a real opportunity to put some explanations in there. Now, I haven't studied this in great detail, and I've made some of these explanations up. I like to think they're right. You know, some of them make sense. A big peak in Neil's born in America after 1969. Yeah, that figures. You know, Neil's birth popular sort of in the 70s when you have a lot of the American rockers with that name. You know, Neil has declined now, but there's a few around. So people like Neil deGrasse Tyson are still keeping it popular. But at time I might have put projected figures, and you know, maybe there's a surge as British data visualization person Neil is responsible for a whole load of new Neils in America. I'm not sure that's going to happen. But you know, I don't think this is using space unnecessarily, and it really sort of adds to the visualization. In particular, because I didn't even use the axis, this is the first point at which I'm using annotations to give actual absolute numbers. But sometimes, you know, there's a difference between white space and empty space, or space that's supposed to be empty. This is one of the first visualizations I ever did in Makeover Monday, and it's probably the first one that got me a little bit of positive feedback. They said, oh, I like what you've done, because we were looking at female representation in legislature across the 50 states in America. And I noticed, well, you know, you can say which ones are better, which ones are worse, which ones have got 5%, which ones have got 40%. But I thought, well, none have got 50. That's not right. So just by putting it there, and just by deliberately leaving a big empty white space, or a big empty slightly grey space, you're actually, in a way, that's like a data mark. That's a mark that's saying there is supposed to be nothing here. If I was to put an annotation there, I don't know, pointing to Montana saying that had 20%, that would be criminal, because that would be taking away the particular message there. And similarly, this, I mean, it's another one that divides opinions. This is from storybehindAline.com, which is a data art project by a lady called Federica Fragapane from Italy. And what she wanted to do, she wanted to show the journeys of half a dozen or so migrants from different places in the world to ports in Italy. And she wanted to show the journeys that they'd taken, the line they took, and the different method of transport they had to get there. And she felt that really sort of told a powerful story, and I agree, and she deliberately left the rest of it absolutely white. She didn't want to put photos of the people, she wanted to put background story, she just wanted to focus on getting it really as simple as possible. Now others have looked at this and thought, well, I don't like it, it's bleak, it's sterile, could you have put something else? So it's very much an editorial decision, but I love the fact that she hasn't, and that white space is to remain white space here. All there is the initials of the particular migrant in case. And that's on, I haven't put it on here, and again, I deliberately didn't put it on the slide because I didn't want everything else on there, but that's storybehindAline.com if you're interested in that particular visualization. And so finally, yes, got a little bit of time still. How important is self-review and feedback? And so really, this is my way of sort of closing off this talk, and to say that if you're considering all these things, that's a really useful self-review process to go through. This is a visualization that I did recently, which gained quite a lot of interest, because I think it's quite striking, but I found some really sort of interesting analysis from it, which I don't always do. And I've broken quite a lot of rules here, and I've got quite a lot of feedback from it, but also quite positive. Okay, I've got a title. My takeaway title, my sort of headline, sub-headline, is there, but it's complicated. This is quite a complicated one to read, and what I wanted to do is have the percentage of people from 4 different diversity groups. So white male, which way around is it? White male, white female, non-white male, non-white female, So that if you are in one of these leading tech companies in the US, what is the chance that you will then make it to a senior role? And whereas I really liked the way it had come out, I liked the sort of method that I tried, you couldn't really see the takeout without that really simple bar chart in the top. And that bar chart said, in 71 of them, you're more likely to get promoted if you're a white male. In 2 of them, you're more likely to get promoted if you're a non-white female. So I had to use that white space there. I had to put quite a sort of detailed explanation. And I did also, I've broken a few rules here. There's no real way you can order them to see, which of the 2 non-white females are most sort of prevalent. So I thought, is it all right that I've broken some of these rules? So I had to consider, I was happy with my use of white space on the bottom. On the top, I sort of figured, no, this needs a bit of explanation on the top there. And then once I threw it open, I probably got more suggestions of how I could improve this than any other viz I've done. And I probably also got more positive feedback as well. So if there's a buzz about what you've done, if people are interested and then you're sort of open to feedback, you'll quite often get that feedback and the ways you can improve it even more if it tells a really sort of interesting story or has a bit of intrigue to start with. So people have said, well, could you change the colours? Could you have done it on absolutes and not percent? Could you maybe have grouped them differently? So instead of from number 1 to 100. And I thought they were all really good suggestions. So there was one sort of piece of feedback which I thought was a really good process to go through. And then I sort of come through to this one again, just to sort of, as I mentioned before, to say that it's possible to think of the same principles when you're doing your self-feedback. So even on this, I wanted to do a piece of art, basically. I wanted to do something a bit crazy that recreated an album cover. But I knew that even when I did that, you couldn't read it without explanations, without annotations, and without a title. So I had to make myself sort of reconsider that. And I thought, well, let's put the title at the bottom. Nowhere will there be a book that says, put a title at the bottom. But that was a decision that made me think, well, I can keep it looking like an album at the top, and then people can read down to the bottom. So I'm changing the priority of what I want. But I then had to reconsider, no, it still needs a title. It still needs annotations. It still needs explanations. It still needs source of inspiration and source of data and things like that. In terms of understanding the marks and the fact that you can't actually see what these things are, obviously I've made sort of quite a creative decision to do that, but that makes it really hard to read. Spoke earlier about whether white space is your friend. One thing about using Tableau is viz in tooltips is wonderful. Viz in tooltips, if used on the right things, if used on the kind of viz that you're expecting people to have a good read of, not the kind of viz that's the fast turnaround cookie monster viz, you can hide your information as to what each of these particular marks means behind viz in tooltips so that people can interact with it. So people can think, okay, that one represents Denzel Washington. Now, obviously, this is not going to be to everyone's taste, and it's a particular personal project that I wanted to do. But I still feel that you need to consider the same principles that you might be considering as well if you had a business dashboard to give to your boss, annotation, title, takeaway. Can he read it? Can she understand it? You want to have the same principles, even if you're doing something daft about Oscars data, trying to look like a 90s dance album. Probably not that likely to do. And the very last thing I want to do is just a quick plug. A really good sort of video blog that I've seen recently was all about feedback. And these 2 guys, Luke Stanky and Ann Jackson, Ann is another Zen Master from the US, is doing some amazing stuff, including in fact, the one she's talking about in the blog is the long-form Shakespeare, the words using Shakespeare sonnets just around the corner. Luke did an amazing chord diagram about Harry Potter. Luke isn't a Zen Master, but he should be. And they both do amazing work. And they both did well in the INVIS, but they didn't get to the top 3. So they had a sort of frank exchange as to what would I have changed, what would I not, what did I like about yours, what did you like about mine? And they knew not what their own strengths and weaknesses were, but what their styles were. And they knew, okay, I get why that didn't go through. Maybe that needed more of a storytelling element for the judges to be interested. Maybe yours was a little overly complex and they were looking for X, Y, Z. So peer review feedback and sort of being honest about it can be a really useful thing to do. And you can take feedback and you can ignore it. It's up to you, just so long as you've considered it. And if you've thought, creatively, no, I did it this way for a reason. I broke that rule for a reason. Well, that's fine. But that's another blog that's just started up that I would encourage you might want to see. And with that, having done a blog all about questions and a talk all about questions, I suppose it's only fair that I ask if there's any questions from the audience. Yes?
Your president timeline,
Mm-hmm.
why does Trump have a red dot?
Remind me which colour the red dot is. Does it mean, you mean is he still alive? Sorry? I think he probably does. The way it came out in the box and the way that the reason that you can only see 2 dots on some of them is because we've got overlapping dates. So the reason you can only see two dots at the end of Kennedy's presidency is that, I can't remember which way around it came, the death date and the end date were both the same. So I don't know if that was a comment on the viz or wishful thinking. Start and end date. Oh yeah, I think end date was just the time that I did it. I could have probably should have left end date off. Wishful thinking, maybe. Any other questions? No? Okay, yeah.
From the one in regards to...
I've just remembered I should be handing this out, so apologies if you didn't. No, okay, I've got it. I'll repeat it.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay, I'll use it.
Go on then.
That's fine. I forget what visualization it was, but the 100 different companies that
Yes.
with the boxes. Why did you group it, or didn't you group it in certain ways? I think that...
I can go about that one quickly. It was that one. My decision really was to group it in terms of group by overall rating. So the rating which the company applied as to which they thought were the best in terms of being diverse to number 100. So I wondered if we may see a trend by doing it that way. So it was a decision to look at the highest rating going down to the lowest rating at the bottom. But I take that as reasonable feedback, because when I've looked at it, I thought, well, you don't really see much in that, and perhaps there were ways we could have done it better. So perhaps if there was a way that, if I'd have grouped it so that we showed first the 71 white males, then the whatever it was, the 10 white females, etc., it would have taken it out of that 10 by 10 grid, and it would have given me design decisions that would have started to look a bit weird. So I left it how it was. But yeah, there's certainly room for improvement on there. There's another similar visualization done on the same data set by a lady called Yvette from Hungary, who I took a little bit of inspiration from, in as much as she did a 10 by 10 like that and had a different shape encoding completely. And that's also around the corner in that visualization as well. I think that's it's probably superior to this one, but it was my inspiration for that, and so between them they've got some similar ideas there. Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? Okay.
Yeah, I really like some of the creativity you've got there, and the audience of these visualizations is the kind of Tableau community. Mm-hmm. But you also work for the NHS or something. So is there a time when you manage to get some sort of zany creative stuff in front and accepted by that audience?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no. I work for Higher Education Statistics Authority, so yes, but you're right, it's a sort of government agency. We look after student data. What I do, a lot of what I do is also encourage other people to do dashboards. We have teams of people who get together, we show them Tableau, we get them to work together, and we give them different data sets, and they come up with something. And I have to sort of try and curb their creativity to not want to be like me, but to put sensible stuff out there. And so a lot of the reason I like to have fun with this is because often it's not the kind of thing that you can do at work. But there are exceptions. A Sankey chart, for example. Now even I, with my sort of weird and wonderful things, I cringe at a lot of Sankey charts. But we have one which I think is really good, and I think it's the proper use of a Sankey chart. And it's a dashboard we have on our website that some of our participants created. And it shows the flow of people from different institutions to different higher education institutions to further education students, or from different studies to postgrad studies. And it's a really nice, visual, engaging, I think, perfect use of a Sankey. Now, we have to make sure that we don't put imperfect Sankeys there when a bar chart would be much more sensible, but there are, having a go at creative stuff, and it does give you a chance to just maybe bring 5% of that back in. And even if it doesn't, it might be, for example, I'd never done a level of details expression before until I was doing one of my fancy visualizations, and I thought, oh, how do I do this? And I had the light bulb moment that the only way I could solve what I was trying to do was to learn how to do level of detail expressions. Well, now I might come and do that back at dashboards in work, even if it's on a much less creative thing. So you can learn skills through doing all sorts of kind of different dashboards, whether it's principles like that I've sort of tried to talk to you about today, or actual Tableau skills, but perhaps using a calculation for the first time that you haven't used in your work, and then you can bring it back there. And that's probably what's driven a lot of what I've done, because professionally, as some of you might find, it can be slow moving. Sometimes you can have days when you don't open Tableau, and I have fun doing this kind of stuff, and then things move more slowly professionally. So by having the sort of the two streams, and by having the freedom that Tableau Public gives you to just try stuff and put it out there and say, what do you think? That sort of helps you grow. Okay.
Could you share with us just at a high level how you created this visualization? Just like the chart type, and I'm assuming it's 100 worksheets versus.
Kind of. Well, the first thing I would recommend. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, mics, of course. Yeah. It's been a long day. The first thing I would say is anything I put up there, you can go straight onto this. So if you find my Tableau Public profile, you can download it, and you'll see what I've done in there. From memory, I think what I just did was I used a sort of a standard way of doing a trellis chart, which there are some great blogs out there, and I think I've used the blog from Andy Kriebel, which shows how to set this up. And then I plotted a point which was, and then a point in that chart, and then depending on which of the four groups it was, I multiplied it by 1 or -1 to get sort of x, y coordinates like that, and then I used the size bar. But yes, honestly, I would say the best thing to do is go in and have a look, and if you've still got questions, then just drop me a line. I'm happy to take more questions, but people are leaving without putting 5s on this app thing. The way this works is if you think it's great, you give it a 5 for high. If you don't think it's so good, you give it a 5 for low, and that way I get a nice unbiased data rating of my talk. I'm still happy to take questions, but as people are leaving, I wanted to do that before we forgot. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.